Single dad fixes stranger's flat tire in the rain. He had no idea she was looking for someone just like him. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain came down in sheets, slanting across the windshield like someone had pulled the sky apart. Jackson Cole gripped the steering wheel with one hand, the other fiddling with the barely functioning defroster. The wipers worked overtime, squeaking with every pass. His truck, an old Chevy that had seen better years, groaned at every puddle it hit. But it moved, and that was enough. The roads were nearly empty, just the occasional set of headlights slicing through the dark. It was late, too late, really. He should have been home an hour ago, curled up on the couch next to Lily, reading her a bedtime story or listening to her talk about her day at school. Instead, he'd been under a '97 Corolla for most of the evening, trying to coax life back into an engine that had no business still running. Another favor for someone who couldn't afford much more than a thank you. Jackson never charged what he should. He figured life had taken enough from people already. His thoughts were already at home. Warm socks, leftover spaghetti, and his daughter's laugh when he saw the flash of hazard lights ahead. A white SUV sat awkwardly on the shoulder, its back tire shredded to ribbons. Just past it, in the dull glow of the taillights, a figure stood hunched under a small umbrella, soaked anyway. Jackson exhaled a quiet sigh and eased the truck to a stop. He rolled down the window a crack. "You okay?" The woman turned, startled. Her hair clung to her cheeks, rain dripping from the end of her nose. Despite the expensive coat and leather boots, she looked more human than polished. "Flat tire," she said, "and apparently I have no idea what I'm doing." Jackson gave a tired half smile. "Most people don't. Pop the trunk. I'll take a look." She blinked, surprised. "You sure?" He nodded. "Yeah, can't let you stand out here all night." As he stepped out into the rain, the cold hit hard. But he was already moving, already kneeling beside the damaged tire. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask why he stopped. Some things didn't need explaining. The rain hadn't let up, not even a little. It came in waves, hard, cold, relentless, soaking through Jackson's jacket and settling deep into his bones. He crouched beside the tire, hands moving with the kind of practiced ease that came from years of doing things the hard way. A flat in this weather wasn't ideal, but he'd done worse with less. The woman stood a few feet behind him, her umbrella doing little more than slowing the inevitable. She wasn't panicking, which he appreciated. Just watching, arms crossed tightly over her chest, hair dripping under the collar of a coat that probably cost more than his entire month's rent. But there was something in her posture, something contained, like she was holding herself together with thread. Jackson glanced up briefly. "You got a spare?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. I've never had to use it." Her voice was calm, low, cultured maybe, not fake, just different. He popped open the trunk and found the compact spare tucked beneath a pristine carpet liner. No tools, though, of course. "You ever changed one of these before?" "Not once." Her tone was dry. "I usually call someone." "Well," Jackson muttered, hauling the jack from his own truck, "someone showed up." He didn't ask what she was doing out on a back road in the middle of a storm. Didn't ask why a woman with tailored boots and delicate earrings was alone at this hour, this far from wherever she probably belonged. People had their reasons. He knew better than to assume. As he tightened the final lug nut, she stepped a little closer. "You didn't have to stop." He shrugged, standing slowly. Didn't feel right not to. She studied him for a second, like she wasn't used to that answer, like she was trying to understand him. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jackson." She nodded once. "I'm Claire." They stood there for a beat, the rain a steady soundtrack between them. "Thanks, Jackson," she said softly. "Really?" He tipped his head. "Drive safe, Claire." And just like that, she got back in her SUV and drove off into the storm. He watched her taillights fade, not knowing the quiet ripple she'd just caused in his life. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time Jackson finished mounting the spare. His jacket clung to him like a second skin, soaked through and heavy, but he barely noticed. He gave the tire a final check, tightening each lug nut with steady precision. Years of practice had taught him to work quickly, even in weather like this, especially in weather like this. Claire stood nearby, arms still crossed, but no longer just to keep warm. Her expression had changed, something quieter, more thoughtful. She watched him work without saying much, her brow furrowed like she was trying to solve a puzzle in her head. He felt her eyes on him, but he didn't look up. He was used to fixing things without fanfare. "There," he said finally, straightening up and giving the wheel a pat. "You're good to go. Just keep it under 50 till you get a real tire on it." She nodded, the rain sliding down her cheek like a tear. "Thank you. I mean that." He offered a tired smile. "Not a big deal." "It is to me," she said, and there was something in her voice, something raw, barely covered by the polished tone she wore like armor. Jackson didn't pry. He never did. People opened up when they were ready, or not at all. Instead, he turned to pack up his jack and wrench, moving with a quiet efficiency. Claire shifted on her feet. "Can I pay you for your time?" He shook his head without hesitation. "Nah, just glad I was passing by." "That's rare," she said. "People don't usually help without expecting something in return." Jackson paused, met her eyes. "Well, maybe you've been meeting the wrong people." She held his gaze, and something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or understanding. "Maybe I have," she murmured. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything, just nodded once more and turned to climb back into his truck. As she got into her SUV and started the engine, she glanced back through the window. He didn't see her smile, but it lingered on her lips all the same. That night, Claire drove away with more than a working tire. She drove away thinking about the man who didn't ask for anything, and wondering why that mattered so much. Claire lingered in the driver's seat, engine humming softly beneath her. The windshield wipers swished in a steady rhythm, brushing away the last of the rain, as if erasing the moment. But the man who had stopped for her, so unexpectedly, so effortlessly, was still standing there, shutting the tailgate of his old Chevy like it was just another Tuesday night, like helping a stranger in the cold meant nothing at all. She opened her door again, stepping out with hesitation. The night air was sharp, but the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind the faint scent of damp asphalt and earth. Jackson looked up as she approached, expression unreadable but not unkind. "I really do want to pay you," she said, softer this time. "I insist." He gave her a look, steady, tired, but gentle. "I'm not interested in your money." She blinked. It wasn't the words, but the way he said them, plain spoken, firm. There was no resentment in his tone, no pride either, just a calm finality, like this was who he was and always had been. Then, something, coffee, a favor, in return, she offered. A little unsteady now, she was used to negotiating, to offering and receiving. It was strange to find a transaction that ended with nothing exchanged but effort and thanks. Jackson rubbed the back of his neck, glanced down the road. "Look, Claire, some people just stop because someone needs help. That's all." She looked at him for a long moment, not knowing what to say. In her world, everyone wanted something. Favor for favor, name for name. But here, in the middle of nowhere, under a gray sky and broken clouds, this man had given her something rare, sincerity without an angle. He nodded once as if that settled everything. "You take care." And just like that, he turned and climbed into his truck. The door shut with a soft thunk, and a second later his taillights flared to life. No number exchanged, no promise to cross paths again, just Claire standing alone beside her luxury SUV, watching a stranger drive away into the fog. She whispered his name once, "Jackson." Then she got back in her car, pulled onto the road, and drove into the dark with a strange ache she couldn't quite name. The hotel lobby was quiet, lit with the kind of soft, expensive lighting that made everything feel like a dream. Claire, Isabella, stepped through the revolving door and into the marble and glass sanctuary that had become her second home. The bellhop gave her a polite nod, but she waved off any assistance. She didn't need help carrying a purse and wet coat. What she needed was far more complicated. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. She watched her reflection in the brushed metal walls, rain-damp hair tucked behind one ear, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes, a weary line between her brows. She looked more like someone who'd run a marathon than a woman who had just come back from a dinner meeting. Only there had been no dinner, just a back road, a flat tire, and a man who refused her money like it meant nothing at all. The penthouse suite greeted her with warm lights and untouched stillness. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, glittering like spilled stars. A bottle of wine sat untouched on the dining table next to a room service tray someone had delivered while she was gone. Everything was immaculate, everything in its place, and still it felt hollow. She kicked off her heels, letting them fall where they landed, and sank onto the edge of the velvet couch. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, 3 missed calls from Mark, her senior VP, and 2 from her assistant. She silenced it without reading the messages. Isabella Grant, CEO of Grant Automotive. The kind of woman people didn't question. The kind of woman who spoke and others fell in line. She had built her life out of strategy, timing, and precision, never allowing chaos or uncertainty to slip through the cracks. And yet tonight, a stranger with worn boots and rough hands had shaken something loose inside her. A mechanic who didn't want anything, who helped simply because it was the right thing to do. She leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The rain tapped gently against the glass. For all her power, her wealth, and the empire with her name stamped across it, she couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her without seeing dollar signs or expectations. And for reasons she didn't yet understand, that made Jackson impossible to forget. Morning broke slow and gray over the town of Fair Hill, the sky hanging heavy with clouds that hadn't yet decided whether to rain or just sulk. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the low rumble of a pickup heading to work. At the edge of town, tucked between a diner and a shuttered bait shop, sat Cole's Garage, paint peeling, sign crooked, but still holding on. Inside, the familiar scent of oil, rubber, and old coffee filled the air. Jackson Cole stood beneath the hood of a rusted Ford, sleeves rolled to his elbows, grease smeared across his hands like war paint. He moved with quiet focus, tuning out the world. The rhythm of fixing things gave him something to hold on to. Machines made sense. People didn't. A pair of small feet padded across the concrete floor, followed by the unmistakable voice of his daughter. "Dad, you forgot your thermos again." Jackson looked up, and there she was, Lily, 10 years old and already more responsible than half the adults he knew. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, her backpack slung too big over one shoulder, a purple jacket zipped to her chin. He smiled. "Thanks, kiddo." She handed it to him like a prized possession. "You said you'd try to remember." "I did, and then I didn't." He gave her a wink, and she rolled her eyes in return, but she was grinning. Lily perched on a stool near the office window, swinging her legs as she watched him work. This was their morning ritual, him fixing cars, her scribbling in a notebook until it was time for school. Jackson didn't have much, but he had this, and he held on to it with both hands. Across the lot, a customer pulled in, and the bell over the door jingled. Jackson wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out to greet them, his shoulders straight, his voice calm. Behind the grit and calluses, there was a man who carried more than anyone ever saw. Grief, hope, the weight of being everything for someone else. The garage was old, the roof leaked. Bills were always tight. But in a world that often spun too fast and gave too little, Jackson kept showing up, because for Lily and for himself, he couldn't afford not to. The city moved fast around her, horns blaring, shoes clacking against wet pavement, people talking into phones like the world might collapse if they paused to breathe. Isabella sat in the back of a sleek black town car, the windows fogged slightly from the change in temperature, her reflection faint and blurred in the glass. She should have been preparing for her afternoon strategy meeting. Numbers, forecasts, boardroom faces, all waiting on her to speak with confidence, precision, control. And yet, her thoughts had wandered again to the man on that rain-slicked road. Jackson. He hadn't flinched at her car, hadn't hesitated at her soaked hair or expensive coat. He'd seen a flat tire and a person who needed help. That was it. No recognition in his eyes, no spark of realization when she'd said her name, just a calm, grounded kindness that felt foreign in the world she moved through. She'd Googled him, of course, Jackson Cole. No social media, no business listings. A basic garage in a town so small it barely warranted a dot on the map. But the search had turned up almost nothing, and somehow that only intrigued her more. He wasn't invisible. He just wasn't trying to be seen. And maybe that was what haunted her the most. "Ma'am," her driver asked, glancing at her through the rear view. "We're at Grant Tower." She nodded, snapping out of her daze. "Thanks, Carl." The lobby of her headquarters was all clean lines and brushed steel, immaculate and echoing with polite efficiency. She walked past security, took the elevator up 32 floors, and entered the executive suite where her assistant was already waiting with a stack of folders and a latte. "Your 9 a.m. was rescheduled, and the board pushed the finance review to Friday," the assistant said, reading from a tablet. "Also, Mark wants a quick word about the supply chain adjustments before—" "Tell him to wait," Isabella said, already walking past. "I need 10 minutes." In the silence of her office, she moved to the window, the city sprawling beneath her. She folded her arms and stared out, but what she saw wasn't the skyline. It was Jackson, standing in the rain, refusing her money, asking for nothing. Just a man being good, for no reason at all, and that somehow felt unfinished. The sun was just beginning to dip when Jackson stepped outside to take a break, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. The air was cooler than it had been in days. The kind of breeze that hinted fall was coming early. Across the lot, the low hum of traffic rolled by, steady and familiar. He took a sip from his dented thermos, savoring the bitter coffee more out of habit than taste. Then he heard it, that unmistakable sputter, followed by the cough of an engine, giving up the ghost. He turned toward the road just as a sleek, gunmetal gray luxury sedan coasted to a stop right outside the garage entrance. The same make as before, same shine, though it now bore the weary look of a car that had been pushed harder than it wanted to go. His brow lifted slightly as the driver's side door opened, and then, stepping out with quiet frustration and an undeniable sense of déjà vu, came the woman he hadn't been able to stop thinking about. Claire. No, Isabella. He'd learned her full name by accident when one of his regulars mentioned seeing Isabella Grant in town the week before. It hadn't clicked until later, until he put it together. The tailored coat, the commanding presence, the kind of grace that wasn't practiced. It was lived. She stood beside her car, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the smoke curling from the engine, like it had personally betrayed her. She hadn't seen him yet. Jackson stepped forward, his voice casual, but edged with curiosity. "You have the worst luck with cars." Her head snapped up, and the look that crossed her face was a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and something close to relief. "Seriously?" she said, shaking her head. "Of all the places." He gave a soft laugh. "You keep breaking down within a mile of my garage, people are going to start thinking it's on purpose." "Maybe it is," she murmured under her breath, almost too quiet for him to catch. But he did. She met his gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The city and the country. The woman with everything and the man who fixed what was broken. And yet, here they were again. As if the road had led her back to exactly where she was supposed to be. Jackson crouched beside the luxury sedan, his fingers brushing the edge of the wheel well as he examined the latest issue. "Radiator's running hot," he muttered. "Could be the thermostat, maybe a leak in the line. Hard to say until I pull it apart." Isabella stood a few feet away, arms crossed, the breeze tugging gently at the hem of her blouse. She was dressed down compared to the first time he'd seen her, jeans, boots, a soft gray sweater, but she still carried that same calm elegance, like the world bent slightly to make space for her. He glanced up at her, squinting against the afternoon sun. "You passing through again, or am I just that lucky?" She gave a faint smile, tilting her head. Bit of both. Jackson straightened, wiping his hands on a nearby towel. "You do realize you broke down less than half a mile from here. Almost feels like fate." He said it with a half smirk, but his eyes were searching hers now, just enough to let the silence stretch. Isabella shrugged, but there was a flicker of something behind her cool expression. "Maybe I just remembered the name on the sign." That answer sat between them, loaded. Not a coincidence, not really. "Can't say I expected to see you again," Jackson said finally. "Well," she replied lightly, "I wasn't exactly planning it. But then again, the world has a funny way of leading you back to the people who make an impression." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't. He turned back to the car, letting his silence say what he couldn't. Truth was, he hadn't stopped thinking about her since that rainy night. About the way she watched him like she was trying to solve a riddle she couldn't quite name. About the fact that, even soaked through and frustrated, she'd seemed more real than most people he dealt with daily. She stepped closer, voice a touch softer now. "Is it okay if I wait here while you check it out?" Jackson nodded. "Sure, there's coffee inside. It's not good, but it's warm." "Perfect," she said, and followed him into the garage. And as the door swung shut behind her, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't over, not even close. The coffee was bitter, slightly burnt, and served in a chipped white mug with a faded racing stripe on the side. Jackson handed it to Isabella without apology, and to her credit, she took it with a quiet thank you and didn't complain. She perched on the edge of the old vinyl bench near the garage window, watching as he poured a second cup for himself from the same ancient machine. "You weren't kidding," she said after a sip, lips twitching into a smile. "It's terrible." Jackson leaned against the counter, mug in hand, shrugging. "Told you, I keep it around for the heat, not the flavor." The garage office was small, just enough space for a desk, 2 chairs, and a bulletin board covered in Post-it notes and oil-stained receipts. The hum of traffic outside was a distant murmur, and for a moment it felt like they were in their own little world, removed from the noise. "So," Isabella said, breaking the quiet, "do you fix cars full-time?" He nodded. "Pretty much. Been working with engines since I was 16. Took over the place after my dad passed. It's not glamorous, but it pays enough to keep the lights on and my daughter in school shoes." Her brow lifted slightly. "You have a daughter?" "Lily," he said, and the name softened something in his face. "She's 10 going on 20. Smart, stubborn, makes the world a little better just by being in it." There was a long pause before she asked gently, "Her mom?" Jackson looked down into his cup. "Passed 5 years ago. Cancer." He said it plainly, without the kind of weight that begged for pity, but it was there in the quiet after. Grief that had settled deep, not loud anymore, just a part of him. "I'm sorry," she said. He gave a small nod, then shifted the conversation. "What about you? You don't exactly scream local." She laughed lightly. "No, definitely not from around here. I live in the city. Work keeps me busy." Jackson noted how carefully she said it. Vague, deliberate. "Doing what?" She smiled over the rim of her mug. "Consulting. Long hours. Complicated clients." He didn't press. He could tell she was keeping the details close, but she didn't feel dishonest, just cautious. And he understood that. Outside, the sun had begun to dip behind the clouds again, casting the room in a pale amber light. Jackson took another sip of coffee and met her gaze. "You seem like someone who doesn't break down often," he said. She tilted her head. "You mean the car? Or me?" He chuckled. "Both." Isabella smiled, but this time it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You'd be surprised." The next morning brought a break in the clouds, one of those rare golden hours where everything looked a little softer, a little more hopeful. Jackson stood outside the garage, tools in hand, as Isabella pulled up once again, this time not with smoke billowing or tires flat. Just her, windows down, the scent of fresh coffee trailing in her wake. "Thought I'd bring peace offerings," she said, holding up a tray with 2 coffees in a brown paper bag. "Figured your coffee machine deserved a day off." Jackson raised an eyebrow, amused. "You bribing me with caffeine now?" "Wouldn't dream of it," she said. "This is just gratitude. Upgraded." Before he could reply, the sound of sneakers on concrete caught both their attention. Lily came bounding out of the office door, hair slightly wild, backpack swinging behind her like a cape. She slowed when she saw Isabella, curious but not shy. Jackson turned toward her. "Lily, this is Miss Claire." Isabella smiled gently. "Hi, Lily." The girl studied her for a second, then stepped forward with confidence that caught Isabella off guard. "You're the lady with the broken car," Lily said matter-of-factly. Isabella laughed. "That's me." Lily narrowed her eyes in exaggerated seriousness. "You know my dad only fixes cars for nice people, right?" Jackson groaned quietly. "Lily." But Isabella leaned into the moment, crouching slightly to meet her at eye level. Then, "I'm really glad he helped me." Lily nodded, satisfied. "Okay, want to see my rock collection?" Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed Isabella's hand and led her to a nearby bench, where a mismatched tin box sat open, revealing a dozen carefully arranged stones, each with its own name and backstory. Isabella sat beside her, genuinely listening, as Lily launched into tales of where she'd found each one. Jackson watched from a distance, arms crossed, unsure what to make of the scene. He wasn't used to people fitting into their world so easily, but Isabella, she wasn't just humoring Lily. She was interested. She asked questions. She laughed. She listened like she meant it. And for the first time in a long while, something in Jackson eased. Later, as Isabella stood to leave, Lily handed her a small pink rock. "This one's for you. It's a heartstone. It means you're brave." Isabella took it like it was made of gold. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered, blinking faster than she wanted to. Jackson didn't say anything, but as she drove away, he looked down at the empty space she'd left behind and felt it more than he wanted to admit. Isabella returned the next afternoon under the pretense of needing her fluids topped off. It was a weak excuse, and she knew it. The car was fine, better than fine, but there was something about the quiet steadiness of Jackson Cole that made the noisy chaos of her usual life feel far away, simpler, honest. She parked across the lot and stepped out just as Jackson emerged from the bay, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't look surprised to see her. Maybe he'd expected it. Maybe he was getting used to her, the way she was getting used to him. "Running out of car problems already?" he asked with a small smile. She smirked. "Just figured I'd give your coffee machine another break." Before he could respond, the sound of sputtering exhaust caught their attention. A battered teal hatchback limped into the lot, coughing like it was about to give up the ghost. Behind the wheel, an elderly man leaned forward, squinting through thick glasses, his expression a mix of worry and quiet resolve. Jackson straightened immediately. "That's Mr. Denny," he said under his breath, already moving. Isabella stayed where she was, watching. The man climbed out slowly, joints stiff, moving like every step was a negotiation. Jackson met him halfway and clapped a warm hand on his shoulder. "Morning, Mr. D. What's going on with the beast today?" "It's the rattle again," the man said, voice gravelly. "Started last night after bingo." Jackson crouched beside the car, listening closely as the engine idled, then killed it with a turn of the key. You mind if I take a look right now? Mr. Denny hesitated. Don't want to get in your way. Can't afford much either, not this week. Jackson just shook his head. Let's not worry about that. Over the next 30 minutes, Isabella watched him work. Patient, focused, speaking to the older man with the same respect he gave anyone else. There was no rush, no show, no hint of judgment, just a man doing what needed to be done because someone needed help. When he finished, he handed Mr. Denny a folded paper towel with a few notes scribbled in black pen. Should hold you over. If it acts up again, bring her in and we'll figure it out. How much do I owe you? Jackson gave a small shake of his head. Just bring Lily some of that banana bread next time. The man chuckled, clapped him on the back, and drove off slowly, the car sounding a little less like a dying lawnmower. Isabella said nothing for a moment, then, "You do that kind of thing often?" Jackson glanced at her. What kind of thing? Helping people who can't pay. He shrugged. If I charged everyone what I could, half this town wouldn't drive. She looked at him carefully then, really looked. This wasn't performative. It wasn't charity. It was who he was, a man who fixed what was broken, not just under the hood, and without meaning to, she felt something shift inside her, small but real. She was starting to see the whole picture, and it was nothing like she expected. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows over the gravel lot in front of Cole's garage. Jackson stood beside the open bay door, wiping grease from his forearms with a rag that had long since given up pretending to be clean. The air smelled like warm rubber and engine oil, familiar and grounding. Isabella leaned against the fender of her car, arms crossed, watching him with a thoughtful expression. She hadn't brought coffee this time, or a made-up excuse about brake fluid. She was just there, and Jackson didn't seem to mind. "You know," she said, not looking at him directly, "I've been thinking." He glanced over, wary of where this was going. "Always dangerous." She smirked, but didn't back down. "This place, it's special, and I don't mean the oil stains and crooked ceiling fan. I mean you, what you've built here." Jackson didn't reply, just tossed the rag onto his workbench and crossed his arms, mirroring her posture. "I've seen a lot of businesses," she continued, "some that look polished and impressive on the surface, but are hollow underneath. Yours is the opposite. This place matters to people. You matter to people." He gave a short, skeptical laugh. "That why you're hanging around? For the charm of my leaky roof and burnt coffee?" "I'm serious, Jackson." Her tone had shifted, quieter now, honest. He could tell she wasn't trying to flatter him. That wasn't her style. "I could help," she said. "You're stretched thin, barely keeping up. You've got talent and heart and a town that trusts you. With the right investment, equipment, maybe a second pair of hands, you could grow this, do more good, make it sustainable." Jackson's jaw tensed. He looked away toward the far corner of the lot, where the fence leaned just slightly from years of weather and wear. "And in return?" he asked. Isabella shrugged. "Nothing. Maybe just peace of mind, knowing I'm helping something that deserves to last." He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was low. "I appreciate it. I do. But I've made it this far on my own. I don't want to owe anyone." "You wouldn't," she said. But he shook his head. "That's what everyone says, until they expect something." There was no anger in his voice, just tiredness, a quiet wall built brick by brick over the years. Isabella didn't press further. She just nodded, a flicker of disappointment passing through her eyes. And yet, as she turned to leave, she said softly, "Well, the offer stands, in case you ever get tired of holding everything together alone." He didn't stop her, but he didn't forget the offer either. It started as a simple thank you. Isabella stood outside the garage just after closing, her silhouette backlit by the fading sun. Jackson was locking up, Lily's backpack already slung over his shoulder as she skipped ahead toward the truck, humming a tune he didn't recognize. The air was warm with the last breath of summer, cicadas humming somewhere in the trees. You've done more for me than you realize, Isabella said, stepping forward. So, dinner? Jackson raised an eyebrow. Dinner? Not a date? She clarified quickly, holding up her hands. Just food, my treat. Lily's invited, too. He hesitated, glancing toward his daughter, who was now balancing on the curb like it was a tightrope. I don't know, he said slowly. We don't exactly eat at places with cloth napkins. Good, Isabella said, smiling, because I booked the back booth at Joni's. Burgers, milkshakes, the works. No white tablecloths in sight. He studied her for a second. The way she said it, casual but hopeful, like she needed this more than she was letting on. All right, he said, but only if Lily gets to pick the milkshake flavors. She can pick mine too, Isabella replied. That night, the three of them sat in the corner booth at Joni's diner. Worn leather seats, jukebox flickering with half-lit numbers, the smell of fried onions clinging to the air. Lily dominated the conversation with stories from school, her words tumbling over each other as she described her latest rock discovery and how she swore her math teacher was part robot. Jackson listened with that quiet pride that made Isabella's chest ache just a little. She found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, leaning into the warmth of the moment, letting herself forget the skyscrapers, the meetings, the relentless pace of her other life. When Lily ducked away to the bathroom, Isabella glanced across the table. You're a good dad, Jackson. He looked up, a little surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Just doing my best. They held each other's gaze for a beat too long. Not quite awkward, just charged, like there was something unspoken neither of them had the courage to name. The check came. Jackson reached for it instinctively. Isabella stopped him with a look. Not a date, she said, her smile gentle, but still my treat. And he let her. Outside, under the neon glow of the diner sign, Jackson helped Lily into the truck. Isabella stood by the curb, arms folded, the night cool now. Thanks, he said quietly. For dinner? For this. She nodded, her eyes soft. Any time. As he drove off, she stood watching until the taillights disappeared. There was no kiss, no promises, just a feeling neither of them could quite explain. Something shifting, something beginning. The evening air was thick with the hum of crickets, the sky a canvas of fading lavender streaked with early stars. Jackson sat on the back steps of his house, an old mug of tea cradled in his hands. The porch light cast a soft glow on the patchy lawn where Lily had left a trail of jump ropes and sidewalk chalk. She was asleep now, curled in bed with her favorite stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm. He stared into the yard, but his mind had slipped elsewhere, years back. To a porch not much different from this one. To a summer night filled with laughter, the smell of grilled peaches, and the sound of his wife's voice singing along to the radio just a little off-key. Anna. The ache of her name hadn't dulled, not really. Time hadn't softened the sharpness. It had just buried it beneath the weight of daily routines, lunches packed, bills paid, tires changed. He still remembered the way she'd laughed with her whole body, how her hand always found his even when they didn't speak, how she'd made everything feel possible, even when life was falling apart. She was gone now, had been for 5 years, and some nights, like this one, the quiet was too loud, and her absence too real. Miles away, in a hotel suite high above the city, Isabella sat in a chair near the window, barefoot, a glass of red wine untouched on the side table. She clutched a faded photograph, the edges worn soft from years of handling. A man stood beside her in the image, polished and handsome, in a tailored suit. Her former fiancé, the man who'd once promised the world, and who had, instead, fractured it. He hadn't just lied, he'd built a life on deception. Behind closed doors, he'd taken her name and her trust and used them to grease the wheels of his ambition. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure, and after the public fallout, the headlines, the boardroom whispers, she had vowed never to need anyone again. Isabella placed the photo face down on the table and stood, pressing her forehead to the cool window glass. Below, the city lights sparkled like nothing had ever broken. And maybe that was the lie they all told themselves, that time healed, that grief faded, that trust could be rebuilt. But maybe, just maybe, some wounds weren't meant to disappear. Maybe they just waited for someone willing to see them. The next morning brought with it the golden warmth of early autumn, sunlight filtering through thinning leaves, the scent of dry grass in the breeze. Jackson was under the hood of an old station wagon, sleeves rolled, hands deep in an engine that had more rust than hope. The radio played low in the background, some country song about second chances and dirt roads. Typical. He heard footsteps before he saw her. Isabella stood at the edge of the bay, coffee in one hand, folder in the other, her expression a mix of determination and something softer, like she wasn't quite sure how this would land. Jackson wiped his hands on a rag and gave her a nod. "Back already?" She held up the coffee. "Still trying to convert you to the good stuff." He accepted it with a small smile. "And the folder?" She hesitated. "That's the real reason I came." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just stepped back and gestured toward the workbench. They sat side by side on mismatched stools, the scent of motor oil clinging to the air. "I know you turned down the investment idea," Isabella began, "and I respect that. But I've been thinking, there might be another way I can help, something that doesn't mess with your independence." Jackson sipped the coffee, watching her carefully. "I'm listening." She opened the folder and spread out a few papers, basic outlines, handwritten notes, sketches of ideas that were raw but earnest. "What if we built something here," she said, "something bigger than just repairs, a program for teens, for single parents, veterans, people who need skills, who need work. You teach them, give them experience. I help with funding, equipment, outreach. No pressure, no strings, just a way to use what you already do to lift more people up." He blinked, genuinely surprised. "I'm not talking about turning this place into some corporate machine," she added quickly. "It stays yours. Your name, your rules. I just want to help amplify it." Jackson looked down at the papers, then at her. "Why?" Her eyes met his. "Because what you're doing here already matters. I just think more people should feel what it's like to be seen the way you see them." He didn't answer right away. The idea settled over him slowly, like rain on dry earth. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about charity. It was about building something that lasted, together. And that was a very different offer. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It crept in quietly. One paint can, one cleared-out storage room, one long evening sorting through rusted tools and broken parts that no one had touched in years. But slowly, steadily, Cole's garage began to shift into something more than just a place where cars got fixed. It started with a single flyer, printed in black and white, and pinned to the bulletin board in the diner. "Free Saturday workshops. Learn basic auto repair. No experience needed." Jackson rolled his eyes at first, thinking no one would show. But when 6 teenagers wandered in the next weekend, awkward, uncertain, curious, he found himself talking about carburetors and oil filters to kids who had never held a wrench in their life. And they listened. Isabella sat in the corner that day, sipping coffee and smiling quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't instruct. She simply watched him in his element, and every so often she'd scribble something in her notebook, ideas, tweaks, names of community groups she wanted to reach out to. By the second week, the local high school had called, asking if they could send more students. By the third, a single mom showed up with 2 kids in tow and a car that wouldn't start. Jackson rolled up his sleeves without hesitation, and Isabella stepped in with juice boxes and a hand on the woman's shoulder that said, "You're not alone." Word spread fast in Fairhill. Soon the shop became more than a place to get your brakes checked. It was a lifeline. A gathering place. On weekday afternoons, kids helped clean up tools in exchange for snacks and homework help. On Saturdays, Jackson taught basic car maintenance, while Isabella organized a side table with donated clothes, school supplies, even gas cards for families who couldn't afford the next trip across town. Jackson had never heard the garage so loud, so full. And though the bills still stacked up and the days were long, something had shifted in him. The walls didn't feel as heavy. The air didn't echo with just loss anymore. He was still fixing engines, still getting grease under his nails, but now, with every repair, every conversation, he felt it. He was also helping people put their lives back together, and somehow, in the middle of all of it, his life was starting to come back together too. The bell above Joni's diner door jingled as Jackson stepped inside, brushing dust from his jeans and nodding at the familiar faces already sipping coffee or biting into early lunch specials. The scent of bacon and fresh biscuits wrapped around him like an old flannel shirt. Comfortable. Familiar. He didn't even have to place his order anymore. Joni herself, silver hair tied up in a scarf and sharp eyes narrowing playfully, slid a mug toward him as he took his usual seat at the counter. "Your usual's coming up," she said, then leaned in slightly, dropping her voice just enough to keep it just this side of casual. "So, is she moving in or what?" Jackson blinked. "What?" Joni smirked. "Claire, or Isabella, or whatever name she's using this week." He stiffened just a little. "She's not using a name. That's her name." "I'm just saying," Joni replied, pouring more coffee. "She's been here a lot. Folks notice. Fancy car, city clothes shows up like clockwork. Some are curious. Some think you're finally moving on." He didn't say anything, not at first, just stared into his coffee, the steam curling like smoke. Outside, a group of teenagers walked past the diner window, one of them wearing a Kohl's Garage t-shirt from the Saturday workshop. The logo looked awkward, a little too big, a little too proud. Jackson swallowed hard. He wasn't ashamed of what they were building, far from it. But the whispers had started weeks ago, subtle at first, then bolder. "She's got her hands in his shop now. Bet he's not paying a dime for all that new equipment. Must be nice having someone with money swoop in." He never answered any of it. He just kept working, kept fixing cars, kept helping. But inside, a familiar discomfort had started to settle in his gut. The feeling of something moving too fast, of expectations creeping in around the edges, of pride poked in places he didn't like. Later that day, back at the shop, he watched Isabella laughing with Lily over a shared bowl of popcorn. Her blazer hung over the back of a stool, her heels kicked off under the bench. It was easy, too easy. And that, more than anything, scared him. The house was quiet in that soft, sacred way it always was after dinner, dishes drying in the rack, the hum of the fridge filling the silence, the faint creak of old floorboards beneath socked feet. Jackson stood at the kitchen sink, hands deep in suds, while Lily sat at the table behind him, coloring carefully in a notebook with her tongue poking out between her lips in concentration. It had been a long day, a good one mostly, but there was a tightness behind Jackson's ribs he couldn't shake, the kind that came from too many questions and not enough answers. He kept scrubbing the same plate over and over. "Dad?" Her voice was small but steady. He glanced over his shoulder. "Yeah, Bug?" She looked up from her drawing. "Do you like Claire?" He froze, not entirely, just enough that his body forgot to breathe for a second. The question hovered between them like a fragile thread. Jackson turned off the tap, wiped his hands on a towel, and leaned against the counter, trying to measure his words. "Why do you ask?" Lily shrugged, but her eyes didn't leave his. "You smile more when she's around, and you laugh sometimes. Real laughs, not the tired kind." That hit him in the chest harder than he expected. He crossed the room and sat beside her, letting out a slow breath. "You notice all that, huh?" She nodded. "I like her. She listens, like really listens, and she asks about my rocks, even the weird ones, not like she's pretending to care." Jackson smiled softly. "Yeah, she's good at that." There was a beat of silence, broken only by the scratching of her pencil on paper. Then, without looking up, Lily whispered, I hope she stays. His heart clenched. He reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She might not, he said gently. People like her, they usually have somewhere else to be. Lily frowned, her coloring slowing. Maybe, but I think she's looking for something too. Jackson didn't answer. He didn't know how to. But as he sat beside his daughter, watching the way she poured herself into the simple act of creating, he thought about Isabella's eyes, how they lingered a little longer each day, how they softened around Lily, how they lit up when she laughed. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe they all were. The boardroom was a pristine box of glass and steel perched high above the city. The lights were too bright, the air too cold. Around the massive table sat 10 men in suits and 2 women with perfectly sharpened heels, all tapping at their tablets and murmuring last-minute notes. The meeting hadn't even begun, but Isabella could feel her heartbeat in her throat. She stood just outside the frosted glass doors, clutching her tablet, breath shallow, hands trembling. Her reflection in the polished window looked polished, calm, exactly what the board expected, but inside something was unraveling. Her chest tightened. She tried to inhale deeply, but the breath caught halfway. The hallway spun a little. She blinked hard. Not now, not here. You've done this 100 times. But this time was different. The agenda was filled with power plays. One vote in the wrong direction, and her entire vision for the company could be erased. Worse, she would be erased. A woman with too much heart, too many distractions, that's what they'd say. Her fingers hovered over the emergency meds in her purse, but instead she pulled out her phone. She didn't think. She just hit the name she'd added weeks ago and never called. Jackson. It rang twice before he picked up. Isabella? She didn't answer at first, just stood there, barely breathing. Hey, he said, gentler now. You okay? No, she whispered, her voice small, cracked. I'm about to go into a board meeting, and I can't. He didn't ask questions. Didn't demand context. He just responded like he'd been waiting to catch her. Okay, listen to me. You're all right. You're safe. You're not alone. She squeezed her eyes shut. I can't breathe, Jackson. My chest... All right, we're going to slow everything down, he said, his voice even, grounding. I want you to count for me. 4 in, hold it, 4 out. You know the drill. With me now. She followed his words like a lifeline. Inhale, hold, exhale, again and again. His voice didn't waver, not once. When the spinning stopped and her shoulders loosened, she opened her eyes and realized she was crouched against the hallway wall, tears drying on her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be, he said. You called. That means you knew you didn't have to go through it alone. Silence sat between them, thick with things neither had said yet. Do you want me to stay on while you go in? He asked softly. No, she replied, wiping her face with the sleeve of her blazer. But thank you for answering. Always. And for the first time in a very long while, she walked into the boardroom knowing someone outside of that glass cared. Not about her decisions, or her numbers, or her strategy. Just about her. The rain came slow that night, a gentle drizzle that painted the asphalt in silver streaks and made the garage lights shimmer like something out of a dream. Jackson stood just outside the bay, a wrench dangling loosely in one hand, watching the world turn quiet around him. The storm was nothing serious, just enough to hush the town and soak the earth. Isabella leaned against the wall under the awning, her arms crossed loosely, hair pulled back but already curling in the damp. She'd shown up late, unannounced, wearing jeans and a soft black sweater, no heels this time, just her. Just real. Neither of them spoke for a while. Jackson tightened the last bolt on the car beside him and set the wrench down. He wiped his hands on the same oil-stained rag he always carried and walked over to where she stood, just far enough beneath the overhang to stay dry. You ever sleep? He asked. She smiled, tired but warm. Not really. You? Only when Lily lets me." They laughed, soft and close, the kind of laughter that filled the spaces silence couldn't. "I shouldn't be here," she said eventually, her voice barely above the sound of the rain on metal. He looked at her then, really looked, the lines of her face in the low light, the vulnerability in her eyes. "But you are," he replied, and then, without fanfare or overthinking, she stepped closer. So did he. Like gravity had finally finished the job it started weeks ago. Her hand brushed his chest, unsure. His breath caught in his throat. The kiss was quiet, slow, like testing the shape of something they hadn't dared imagine before. Her lips were soft and tentative, and he responded like a man trying to remember how to be touched without breaking. But then they pulled back, almost at the same time. Jackson stared at her, his heartbeat loud in his ears. "I didn't mean to, but—" "Me neither," she interrupted gently, though she didn't move away. "I just—" He nodded. "I know." The rain fell steady around them, a curtain of sound and feeling neither one of them could step through just yet. They stood there for a long moment, the air between them thick with everything they couldn't say. And yet, even in the hesitation, neither one walked away. The knock on Isabella's office door came with the crisp rhythm of someone used to walking into rooms they didn't belong in and making them theirs anyway. She didn't look up right away. The view from her floor-to-ceiling windows was drenched in morning haze, the skyline softened by a veil of gray clouds. The city looked quieter than it was, safe, removed. She knew better. "Come in," she said finally. The door opened, and the voice that followed struck her like ice down the back of her neck. "Still painting the sky from your ivory tower, Isa?" She turned slowly. There he stood. Cullen Vance. Tailored suit, perfect smile, the same confident tilt of his head like he hadn't lied to her, betrayed her, broken years of trust with the ease of a handshake. Her fingers curled tightly around the edge of her desk. "You have 5 seconds to explain what you're doing here." He stepped further in like he hadn't heard the threat. "Easy. I'm here for business and maybe a second chance." She laughed. "Once, cold. You came to the wrong building for both." He gave her that look, half apologetic, half rehearsed. "Look, I made mistakes. Big ones. I won't deny it. But I've changed." "No," she said, voice firm. "You've rebranded." His smile faltered for a flicker of a second. "I'm here with an offer your board wants you to hear. A merger, clean, mutually beneficial. You and I, Grant Automotive and Vance Innovations, finally becoming what we were supposed to." She crossed her arms. "You mean what you wanted? A marriage of money and headlines. This time it's real, strategic. No personal strings, unless you want there to be." His eyes lingered, and she felt the heat rise in her chest, but not from affection. "You think because I've been quiet, I've been waiting for you?" she said, stepping closer. "I built this company back from the edge after you nearly dragged my name through the dirt. You think I'd hand you my legacy?" "Not just your legacy," he said softly. "Your future." The words hung heavy. She stared at him, jaw tight, then turned away. "Leave the paperwork with my assistant." "You'll look it over?" he asked. I didn't say that, but she would. She had to. The board had been pressuring her for weeks to find a growth partner. Vance's name still carried weight in the industry, and no matter how far she'd come, there were still shareholders watching, waiting. But as the door clicked shut behind him, her thoughts didn't go to spreadsheets or negotiations. They went to a mechanic in a small-town garage who never once asked her for anything, and who had never needed to. Jackson. The garage was quieter than usual. No humming radio, no laughter from Lily sorting tools in the corner, no chatter from Saturday volunteers, just the steady tick of a cooling engine and the faint creak of the bay doors shifting in the breeze. Jackson stood beneath the hood of a half-finished repair, staring at the same bolt he'd already tightened twice. His hands moved automatically, but his thoughts were miles away, back in that booth at Joni's where a customer had mentioned Isabella's name over breakfast like it was gossip, not fact. "Did you hear?" the man had said, dunking his toast in runny eggs. "Her ex is back in town. Vance, the tech guy. Word is there is a merger on the table. Power couple. Round 2. Jackson hadn't asked for more. Didn't have to. The look on Joni's face had said enough. Now he wiped his hands, trying to scrub off a discomfort that had nothing to do with grease. Isabella hadn't mentioned it. Not in any of the quiet conversations over coffee, not during the moments they stood close, but never quite close enough. She hadn't said a word about him, and maybe that was what hurt the most. When her SUV pulled into the lot later that day, Jackson didn't look up. He kept working, his shoulders squared, jaw tight. She stepped out, heels clicking on the concrete. "Hey." "Hey, Po," he said without looking. A beat of silence. "I wanted to talk." "I'm busy." She blinked, surprised by the flatness in his tone. "Is everything okay?" Jackson exhaled, finally lifting his gaze. "You should have told me." Her lips parted. "Told you what?" "That he was back. That there's a deal on the table. That your world doesn't just brush up against mine. It swallows it." She took a slow breath. "It's business, Jackson. Not, He stepped away from the car. "No, it's your life. The suits, the mergers, the headlines. I'm not built for that." Her voice dropped. "I didn't think you'd need to be." "Well, maybe I do," he said, sharper than he meant. "Because I've done the whole watch someone leave thing before, and I'm not planning on being the warm-up act for your return to whatever empire he's offering you." She stared at him, hurt flickering in her eyes, but she didn't argue, didn't plead. Jackson wiped his hands clean and walked past her without another word. Because loving someone like her, it didn't just come with risk. It came with the kind of weight he wasn't sure he could carry again. The morning she left, the sky over Fair Hill was a dull sheet of gray, heavy with the kind of silence that usually came after something had ended. Isabella stood at the edge of the gravel lot, the garage behind her bathed in the soft, reluctant light of dawn. Her SUV idled quietly, packed, ready. There was no one around, just the chirp of birds waking to a town that no longer felt like hers. She had waited for days, waited for Jackson to say stay, waited for him to knock on her door or call or even just look at her the way he used to. But he hadn't. The last time they spoke, if it could even be called that, his voice had been sharp, distant. There was no space for her between his pride, his pain, no room for explanations or promises. She'd offered the truth. He hadn't wanted it. Now, standing there with the sun trying to rise behind a veil of clouds, she felt the ache of that rejection settle deep. Not because she hadn't expected it, but because she had hoped, naively, maybe, that he would be different. She turned one last time to look at the garage. It hadn't changed. Still small, still worn, still filled with the sound of engines and the scent of oil and something like belonging, and still utterly his. She thought about Lily, about the rock the girl had given her, still in the console of her car. "Heart stone," Lily had said, "for bravery." It didn't feel brave to leave, but staying, unwanted, would have felt worse. Isabella climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door softly, like she didn't want to wake a sleeping memory. Her hands gripped the wheel, her eyes stung. As she pulled onto the road, the rain began again, just a light drizzle at first, then harder, tapping against the windshield like fingers trying to pull her back. But she didn't turn around. She drove toward the city, toward meetings, toward the kind of life she'd once thought she wanted, her chest hollow, her heart quietly breaking. Because this time, she wasn't walking away to protect herself. She was leaving because he wouldn't let her stay. The days blurred together after Isabella left. Jackson threw himself into the garage with a kind of quiet ferocity. Early mornings, late nights, grease-stained hands that rarely stopped moving. If he wasn't under the hood of a car, he was sweeping the floors, rearranging shelves that didn't need rearranging, checking inventory twice. The shop ran smoother than it ever had, and yet it felt empty. The Saturday classes continued. Teenagers still came by to learn how to change a tire or replace brake pads, but the laughter was thinner, the energy lower. Jackson smiled when he needed to, nodded when expected, but everyone could feel it. Something was missing. Someone. Lily noticed it first. Of course she did. She stopped mentioning Isabella's name, though her drawings still included 3 figures instead of 2. She grew quieter in the afternoons, sitting longer at the workbench without asking questions. The pink rock she'd once given Isabella disappeared from the display on her windowsill, tucked somewhere private, maybe too painful to look at. "Dad?" she asked one night, over spaghetti, her voice small. "Did Claire go home forever?" Jackson didn't look up. "Yeah, Bug, she did." Lily was silent for a while, pushing her noodles around with her fork. "Was it because of me?" He dropped his fork. "No, never. It wasn't you. But you haven't smiled like before." Jackson leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Some things just don't work out, even when you want them to." She nodded, like she understood, but she was 10. She didn't. Not really. And neither did he. At night, when the house was dark and Lily was asleep, Jackson would stand on the back porch with a mug of coffee gone cold, staring out into the stillness. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast for days. He'd pushed her away. He told himself it was the right thing, that their worlds were too different, that she'd leave eventually. He just hadn't expected it to hurt this much when she actually did. The garage kept running. The town kept turning. But Jackson, he didn't. Not really. Not anymore. It was tucked between a stack of invoices on his desk, barely visible, almost forgotten. Jackson found it on a Wednesday morning, when the sky was pale and still, and the coffee tasted like cardboard. He was sorting through paperwork, chasing the distraction of routine, when the edge of creamy stationery caught his eye. Unmarked, no return address, just his name written in familiar handwriting, deliberate, steady, unmistakably hers. Jackson. He stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Part of him didn't want to read it. The other part had been waiting for this, aching for it really, without admitting as much. He opened it slowly. "I don't know if you'll find this. Maybe you'll toss it. Maybe you'll read it and forget it. But I had to leave something behind because walking away without saying what I meant, that wasn't fair. Not to you, not to Lily, not to me. I came back to Fair Hill by accident, but I stayed on purpose. I stayed because I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, something real, something good. I saw it in you, in the way you treat people, the way you protect what matters, the way you love your daughter like she's the center of the universe. I didn't expect to feel anything. I didn't plan for you. And I certainly didn't plan to fall for your quiet strength or your stubborn pride or the way your eyes soften when you talk about Lily. I didn't tell you about the merger because I wasn't sure it mattered. I thought maybe we could build something different together. Not a business, a life. But I pushed too hard. Or maybe you pulled too far away. I don't blame you. I just wish you'd seen me, not as someone who might leave, but as someone who finally wanted to stay. You once told me some people just help because it's the right thing to do. That stuck with me. I guess this letter is my version of that. No agenda, no pitch, just the truth. If you ever want to find me, you know how. If not, thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be seen. Isabella. Jackson sat there in silence, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. The garage around him buzzed faintly with life. An engine starting in the bay, someone laughing outside, but none of it reached him. Because in her words, in her truth, something cracked open. And for the first time in weeks, he realized what he'd been missing wasn't just her presence. It was the chance he never let himself take. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil and old pine cleaner when Jackson sat across from Pete in the back booth at Joni's. It was late, past the dinner rush, early enough that no one would overhear. The vinyl seat creaked beneath him as he nursed a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. his hands wrapped tight around the mug like he needed something solid to hold. Pete leaned back with the kind of ease that came from being Jackson's oldest friend, and the only one who knew just how deep his silences could go. "She's gone, huh?" Pete asked, not unkindly. Jackson nodded, slow and heavy. "Been a couple weeks." "And?" Jackson let out a breath through his nose. "And I let her walk away." Pete raised an eyebrow. "She run off, or did you push?" Jackson didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, watching headlights roll past in the dark like brief passing thoughts. Then he turned back, jaw tight. "I told myself it was the smart thing," he said finally. "That she didn't belong here. That her life, everything about it, was too different. Too far from mine." "And now?" Pete asked. "Now I'm wondering if I was just scared." Pete didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Jackson rubbed a hand over his face, the words thick in his throat. "You know what it's like, losing someone. When Anna died, it broke something in me. I kept it together for Lily, but since then, I've built this life with no room for anything else, safer that way." "But empty," Pete added. "Yeah," Jackson's voice cracked on the word. "She made it feel full again, not just the shop or the house, me. And I shut her out because I was too afraid to lose again. I didn't even give her the chance to stay." Pete leaned forward, arms on the table. "So what are you going to do now? Keep pretending this town is enough? That your heart's some broken machine that can't be rebuilt?" Jackson let out a shaky laugh. "I don't know, man. I just know she deserved more than what I gave her." "And maybe," Pete said, finishing his coffee with a shrug, "you've still got time to give it." Jackson looked down at his hands, rough, calloused, capable of fixing everything except the one thing that truly mattered. Until now. The city felt like another world, faster, louder, sharper at the edges. Jackson hadn't been in years, not since Anna's funeral, when crowds and honking horns felt like too much noise for a heart too broken. But now, as he drove through its maze of glass and steel, Lily humming softly in the back seat, the noise felt manageable. Necessary, even. He hadn't told her much, just that they were going on a short trip. Lily didn't ask questions. She packed her favorite book, her glittery rock, and 2 peanut butter sandwiches without a word. But when they crossed the city limits and the skyline rose around them, she leaned forward in her seat. "Are we going to see Claire?" Jackson tightened his grip on the wheel. "Yeah, Bug, I think we are." He didn't know exactly where to start, just a name scribbled in a notepad from her letter, Grant Automotive HQ. That and the memory of her voice, soft and breaking over the phone, when she said she couldn't breathe. He had no speech prepared, no big sweeping apology. All he had were sleepless nights, an ache he could no longer ignore, and a letter that had rewired the parts of him that once believed love was too dangerous to try again. They pulled up outside a sleek glass building that towered like a promise he wasn't sure he deserved. Jackson parked the truck on a side street, completely out of place beside luxury sedans and spotless town cars. "You gonna be okay?" he asked, turning to Lily. She grinned. "I brought snacks. I'll survive." He leaned over and kissed her forehead, heart thudding like it wanted to run ahead of him. Inside, the lobby was all polished floors and brushed steel. The receptionist blinked at him as he approached, dusty flannel and boots tracking in memories of a different world. "I'm here to see Isabella Grant," he said, voice rough. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," he admitted, glancing toward the elevator banks, "but I think she'll want to see me." He didn't know what he'd say when he found her. He just knew he had to. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt endless. Jackson stood alone inside the mirrored walls, one hand gripping the strap of his worn canvas bag like it could anchor him in a world that didn't feel like his. His boots were still damp from the rain outside, and he could see the mud drying around the soles. Everything about him, his clothes, his posture, the oil beneath his nails, screamed wrong place, wrong man. But he didn't turn around. Somewhere above, Isabella was about to make a decision that could shape the next decade of her life. A merger, a clean slate, a return to the world she came from. And he was arriving with nothing but a heart full of regrets and a hope he'd thought he buried years ago. The elevator chimed softly, the doors sliding open to a polished hallway filled with glass walls and hushed voices. The floor beneath him gleamed like water. Jackson stepped out, pulse thudding in his ears. At the end of the corridor, a receptionist's eyes widened as he approached, but before she could speak, he spotted her, Isabella, through the glass. She was seated at the head of a long boardroom table, a dozen executives flanking either side. Papers were spread out before her, a sleek pen poised in her hand. She looked composed, powerful, unreadable. Until she glanced up, her eyes caught his through the glass, and in that second, everything else in the room fell away. The lawyers, the suits, the murmured voices. It all blurred like fog on a window pane. She stood before she realized she was doing it, her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. Jackson pushed open the door, ignoring the startled looks and tight-lipped silence from the room. He walked toward her, every step echoing like it belonged in a different story. "I know I don't belong here," he said, voice steady but raw, "but I couldn't let you sign that without saying what I should have said weeks ago." "Jackson!" "I was scared," he cut in gently. "Not of you, of what you made me feel, of what I stood to lose. But the truth is, I already lost something the second I let you walk away." The boardroom sat frozen. Isabella looked at the paper in front of her, then at him. Then she slowly placed the pen down, and every heartbeat between them suddenly felt like a new beginning. Jackson stood at the head of the boardroom like a man who'd just crossed 1,000 miles to reach a single moment. The suits were watching him, half curious, half irritated. Colin Vance sat back in his chair with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, like he was waiting for security to handle it, like he already believed this was beneath them all. Isabella didn't move, not yet, but her eyes were locked on Jackson's, and that was all the encouragement he needed. "I don't have a pitch," Jackson said, his voice rough but clear. "No spreadsheets, no titles, just me." He glanced around, then back to her. "You once told me you weren't sure where home was anymore. I didn't say it then, but I should have. Home's not a place. It's people. And you? You became that for me before I even saw it coming." The silence in the room grew sharper. "I pushed you away because I've been living like everything I love can vanish without warning. And maybe it can. But what I realized is, pushing people out doesn't stop the hurt. It just guarantees you're hurting alone." Isabella's breath caught, barely audible. Her hands rested on the table, but she wasn't leaning on them anymore. She was listening, leaning forward, feeling every word. Jackson swallowed hard. "You changed my life, Isabella. And not just mine. Lily still draws you in every picture she makes. She still talks about your heartstone like it's magic. You gave her someone to look up to. You gave me a reason to believe again." He stepped closer, softer now. "I don't care about your title. I don't care what deals you sign. I care about what we built back in that garage, about who we were when the noise faded and it was just you and me and something that felt like the start of a life worth living again." A beat passed. The room was still. And then gently he said the words that had been buried for far too long. "I love you. I want a life with you. And I'm here. Not because I'm trying to stop you, but because I want you to choose us instead." He stood there, vulnerable and unpolished, with nothing to offer but the truth. It was her move now. The clouds had been gathering all morning, low and heavy, waiting for the perfect moment to open. And when they did, just as Jackson stepped out of the building and back onto the slick sidewalk, it was like the sky had been holding its breath for this exact release. Rain came in a steady pour, soaking through his flannel shirt within seconds, plastering his hair to his forehead. But he didn't move, didn't run. He just stood there, rooted in place, staring at the ground, letting it wash over him. Maybe he'd said too much. Maybe he'd said it too late. Inside, the boardroom remained silent long after he'd gone. Isabella hadn't said a word. She'd simply looked down at the unsigned contract, her reflection staring back from the gloss of the paper. Colin had muttered something under his breath, the others shifting uncomfortably, waiting for her to sit back down and make it all disappear. But she didn't sit. She stood, quietly, surely, and walked away. Now, as Jackson wiped the water from his eyes and turned to leave, the building doors swung open behind him. He froze. There she was. Isabella stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, without a coat, without a care. The rain flattened her hair, darkened her clothes, clung to her skin like memory. But she kept walking until she was in front of him, breath visible in the cool air, eyes locked on his like they were the only steady thing left in the world. Neither of them spoke for a moment. And then she did, her voice low but certain, cutting through the sound of the falling rain. "It's always been you." Jackson blinked, stunned, his heart stumbling in his chest. She smiled softly, tears mixing with rain. "From that first night on the side of the road, from the second you looked at me and didn't see anything but a person who needed help. No titles, no power plays, just me." He reached out then, cupping her face with calloused hands, and she leaned into him like she was falling into the safest place she'd ever known. And under the same kind of rain that started it all, they kissed. Not like the first time, careful and uncertain, but like a homecoming, like love that had waited and finally been chosen. The For Lease sign disappeared from the window of the old bakery on Main Street one early October morning. In its place, a fresh coat of white paint brightened the trim, and a new wooden sign went up a week later, carved by hand. The Hearth. Coffee, books, and second chances. Inside, Isabella moved through the space with a calm she hadn't known she was missing all those years in glass towers and boardrooms. Her heels had been traded for boots, her phone for a handwritten to-do list. She still carried ambition in her bones, but now it wore softer edges, warmer purpose. She greeted every customer by name. Outside, across the street, Jackson tightened the bolts on a pickup's engine as Lily darted through the garage lot with a clipboard and a bright pink baseball cap. Self-appointed junior manager. Her laugh rang out like wind chimes, light and certain. The garage had grown in quiet, meaningful ways. The mentorship program Isabella helped launch was now a weekly fixture, with teens learning to rebuild engines and, quietly, rebuild themselves. There was even talk of expanding a second bay, a tool fund, maybe a scholarship or two. They never made any grand declarations when she moved back. No press release, no big goodbye to the city, just a small U-Haul, a quiet key exchange, and a dinner with Lily that turned into a routine without anyone needing to say it out loud. This was life now. Their life. Sunday mornings were slow and sweet. Pancakes in the kitchen. Isabella in Jackson's flannel. Lily curled up on the couch with a dog they never planned to adopt, but couldn't bring themselves to turn away. Some days, Isabella still woke with that old panic in her chest. The feeling that it would all slip away, that someone would knock on the door and remind her she didn't belong in a place like this. But every time, Jackson would pull her close and whisper, "You're here. You stayed." And every time she would answer, "I'm home." Because home wasn't power or noise or status. It wasn't a tower with her name on it. It was a mechanic's garage, a little girl's laugh, a man who met her in the rain and never asked for anything but the truth. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. She was shivering on a